Daulton. I'm a drug addict. Get into step 2 a little bit, but I'll give you a little bit of background before, right? Kind of extra happy to be speaking here is because drugs are a huge part of my story, right? I definitely identify with a lot that's spoken here. You know, one, the stories and whatnot, like talking about drugs, but also like using the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous as finding a solution, a way out, right? I'm born and raised in New York, and been down here about 5 years, right? And never, ever attempted any stretch of sobriety, right? I never could put together 48 hours, you know, let alone anything of substance. Moved down to Florida. I go to a rehab, right? My first 28 days, you know, and my first 28 days clean ever in my adult life, you know, and I felt great, you know, I felt accomplished, you know, but on the flip side of that, right, I got introduced to this thing, right? I got introduced to guys who brought meetings in, right? And forever, you know, as far back as I can remember, I would fit in, but how I deemed fit, right? I could assimilate to any group, you know, but I kind of never really fit, right? And a lot of that was to do with my using, right? The way I like to get fucked, the way I like to get high and whatnot was always a lot different than, was always a lot different than, you know, my immediate friends or people I called friends, right? And it wasn't until that detox that I had guys brought a meeting in, right? They brought a meeting in on, I think it was Tuesday nights at the time. And this is the first time that I've heard of anybody talking my language, right? Getting loaded the same way I did, right? Or even close to, you know, and they were talking about a way out. And like, I had a hard time wrapping my head around it, but it was nice. It was refreshing. You know what I mean? I had been surrounded with nothing but chaos, and I was at the center of that, you know, constantly in my life. And guys brought a meeting in, right? And they were just talking my language, right? They were talking about doing things in a manner in which, you know, like I said, I felt ashamed to even, you know, talk about, let alone admit, you know, and I'm extremely grateful for those guys, right? But something was happening there that I didn't really catch at the time, you know? They were bringing in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, right? But again, they talked about drugs, so that's why this is awesome, you know? And hearing their stories and whatnot, right? And hearing, again, feel like they're telling my story in a lot of ways, you know, maybe leaving out some detail here or there, right? But they're sitting in front of me by choice, bringing a meeting in to a detox, you know, and I feel like, well, how is this even fathomable, right? Because they're claiming to do something that I've never even attempted, you know, which is kind of funny how that works, right? I didn't know how to go about what they were talking about, right? Being sober, being clean, being happy, right? Relatively, you know what I'm saying? But finding peace from the chaos that they once, you know, were the creators of, right? And it was something that didn't stick right away, you know. I was attracted to that, you know what I mean? And it took a few more stints in rehabs, you know. They got quicker and quicker in succession, right? But the same guys were bringing meetings in, right? The same guys were coming in, bringing a message in that I have a hard time denying that it's working, right? Hell, I did the 28-day standing on my head, went right back out, right? And I started getting loaded in a way that it got worse every time for me, right? I just started doing things in a way that I had never done the time prior, you know what I mean? And that's scary, you know what I mean? That's surprising. I had a bunch of those, you know, well, I don't do that. You know, it's like, I don't smoke crack, you know, well, that ended quickly, you know? It's like, well, you know, yeah, I do dope, but I don't use needles, you know? Again, after my next day in detox, that domino fell too, right? And back at detox again, right? And the same guys are bringing these meetings in. And I'm like, I think I mustered up the, might to like X their name once, you know what I mean? And they're all excited. And I'm like, geez, I'm like, I just wanted to half-ass seem like I was interested, right? Because to be honest, they're talking a whole different language, right? They're doing something that I have never even attempted, let alone been able to do on my own, right? And after that stint, right, I get locked up, right? And now I haven't been in trouble a whole lot. I don't have a lengthy record, nothing like that. But I was forced to sit in jail for a little period of time, right? And essentially I detoxed there, right? I didn't have the cush meals. I didn't have the counseling sessions. I didn't have these guys bringing the meetings in, right? And I was kind of left to myself, right? And now, hindsight, I am grateful it went down like that, right? Because what I was given was a breather, right? I was given a breather without kid gloves, right? Without, hell, you get into these detox, and it's great, for some people, but, they're on your, whatever, bube taper, I'm like, well, I was just doing that in between every one of my runs, so I'm like, this is still familiar, and getting locked up and having to sit for a little while, right? Obviously, none of that. I get back out. I get sentenced to ACE, right? It's a 6-month halfway house program, right? And I'll be damned, right? The same guys that were bringing the meetings in to the detoxes, now they're bringing meetings into ACE. I'm like, what? I'm like, well, what is happening? Because now I feel like I've known them, right? And I don't know them. I just heard them share a handful of times, right? But still, right, I see them being able to leave those detoxes in their own cars and shit. They're talking about having families, how their families are having them back in their lives, right? All these things, it's still so fucking foreign to me, right? It is something that I have never been able to put together on my own, right? And this time around, I decided to, give it a try, give what they were talking about a try, right? And kind of goes into what they asked me to speak about tonight, right? It's step 2. Came to believe in a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, right? And again, maybe given a big book at detox and stuff, like, yeah, I read that stuff, but I may have been able to even regurgitate it a few times, but I had no real understanding of what the hell they were talking about, and I also didn't know that, like, I was already moving in the right direction by being curious to the guys that had, things I wanted, as far as, like, being able to stay clean for 28 days without a, medicated nurse on call duty 24 hours a day. You know what I mean? And start talking about this power greater than ourselves, right? The whole God thing, right? I was raised Roman Catholic. I went to an all-boys Jesuit high school in New York City, right? And that whole God thing, that's immediately, what I associated to, not for anything bad. It's just that's where my head would go, right? And when they were coming in and talking about this deal, that's not what they were talking about. They weren't talking about the monks or the Franciscan nuns that I grew up learning religion from, right? And how to wrap my head around, like, power greater than myself, restore me to sanity. Now you're asking me to figure out a whole lot there, and in reality, they weren't asking a whole lot of me, right? Kind of would boil down to, do you believe that I believe, right? And sure, maybe, like, yeah, I guess, but more so, like, what I bought into was the guys that were sitting in front of me, right, telling their story, telling my story, essentially, right? A little different, a little worse, a little better, whatever it is. They were talking about a way out. They were talking about something that was working in their lives, right, that they were doing differently, but something working, and it wasn't themselves, right? They didn't just make this thing up, right? They didn't just one day out of the blue figure this all out with no, no learning there, right? And again, God, what I grew up with, Catholic God, all that, good, cool, awesome, works for some people, my grandpa, you know what I mean? For a religious man, he actually stopped drinking and he went right to God, right? He went to the church. Never stepped foot in an AA meeting, nothing. And all I heard about was his drinking when I was younger. And that screwed me up a little bit too. You know what I mean? I'm watching somebody I look up to, was able just to put it down and never touch it again. What? But again, my pop wasn't like me in that regard, right? And some people can go to God, but that's not what I'm talking about here, right? I thought I was so far gone. I thought I was too far gone, right? I literally probably was too far gone from human aid, right? Because I feel like it would have righted itself, right? I would have received help from somewhere. I have a loving family, a loving mother, all that, right? None of that was enough, right? Consequences, none of that was enough, Jail, I ended up back having to sit for a little while, right? None of that was enough, right? But something that was constant for me and was seeing this work in guys who brought meetings in, right? Seeing it work in their lives, right? Because they're talking and telling their story. And frankly, the person that they're telling me about is just not the person that's sitting in front of me, right? And that was like really simple for me. It was a lot for me to wrap my head around maybe, but it was pretty simple. Like, they are not the same as they once were. Right? And all I wanted to be forever in my life was just be a little bit different, right? I was always different. Don't get me wrong. But I just wanted to not feel the way I was always feeling, right? I didn't want to feel that impending doom, partly because I was happening, I had my hands all over my life in every aspect, right? And it got me shit. It just, I burned it to the ground over and over and over again. And these guys that were bringing meetings in, right? Very grateful for that. They were talking about a power greater than themselves that could restore us to sanity, right? And I believe that they believe because the person that they were telling me about, the person that I related to, right, was not the same guy sitting in front of me, And I wanted to know more. I wanted to, figure out if that was possible for me, and lo and behold, it is possible. It is, and I never thought this was ever on the cards for me, And it's not like this big grandiose. I don't have all the things I want to have. I'm not where I want to be in life necessarily, right? But doing this deal, right, has allowed me to, for instance, right, navigate something very traumatic in my life, right? Something that I always said would do me in, right? Lost my mother not too long ago, and I stayed sober through it, right? And frankly, that is not my doing, right? There's something bigger at play here, right? There is something that I'm just barely getting tapped into, right? And I'm allowing God into my life, right? That even sounds weird for me to say, but it is the truth. And again, I'm not doing it perfectly by any means. But that is the only thing I've done different this time around, right? Is taking all the suggestions best as I can. I'm not perfect, right? But letting this deal happen, right? And not fighting it, right? Because the tighter I hold on to something, this is for everything really, the tighter I hold on to something is the farther it slips out of my grip, right? And that's what I did in every aspect of my life forever, right? Up until recently. I started taking my hands off the steering wheel. I stopped trying to, if I think it's good for me, probably not good for me. Outright, downright, fails not, But again, that started with just me believing in somebody else that they believed, right? That's really as basic as it may sound. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but it is that simple, right? And yeah, I think that's all I got. I don't know how much longer you want me to go, but
I think